At exactly 8:12 on a Thursday morning, the entire HOA board stood frozen at the front entrance of Cedar Ridge Estates, watching 6 concrete trucks make U-turns and disappear down the highway. The workers weren't taking a lunch break. They were leaving for good. Every construction permit tied to the subdivision's final expansion had just been suspended. Deliveries were canceled. Contractors were ordered off the site. The half-finished stone entrance the HOA had spent months bragging about wasn't going to be finished. Not that day, and not anytime soon. It all happened because the HOA president insisted on moving a legally protected survey monument 3 feet. She called it just an old rock. She had no idea that one decision would halt the entire development. The strangest part, I never reported her. I never touched the marker. I simply stood there and watched her tell everyone that the land already belonged to the HOA. Even after I warned them, they were looking at the wrong piece of history. Within weeks, the same spot where landscapers had been planting flowers was surrounded by county vehicles, licensed surveyors, attorneys, and stacks of historical records spread across folding tables. 3 months earlier, I thought buying an old ranch next to Cedar Ridge Estates was going to be the quietest investment I'd ever make. Turns out, that forgotten stone marker had been quietly protecting the legal history of the entire subdivision long before any of us showed up. And the morning Melissa Grant decided it needed to go was the morning this whole story really began. 3 months earlier, Cedar Ridge Estates was just another growing subdivision on the edge of town. My ranch sat directly beside its northern boundary. I'd bought the property a few years earlier after retiring from county surveying. I wasn't looking for another career. I wanted quiet mornings, a few horses, and enough open land that nobody could tell me where to put a fence. Most days followed the same routine: coffee before sunrise, a slow walk around the pasture, checking fence lines that had been standing longer than most of the homes going up next door. That's why I noticed changes other people missed: survey monuments, boundary markers, old reference points that quietly kept entire developments legally connected to the land beneath them. To everyone else, they looked like forgotten chunks of stone. To me, they were part of the legal framework every property depended on. One afternoon, I noticed fresh construction stakes near the entrance road. The new stone gateway was going farther north than the original plans I'd seen months earlier. Curious, I walked over with an old survey copy I'd kept from when I purchased the ranch. The corner monument separating my property from Cedar Ridge was still exactly where it had always been, but the decorative entrance wasn't. It crossed closer to the monument than I expected. As I compared the measurements, I saw a familiar SUV pull onto the construction site. Melissa Grant climbed out carrying a rolled-up landscape drawing. Even before she spoke, everyone around her started listening. She walked straight toward the entrance, glanced at the monument, and frowned. "That thing ruins the symmetry," she said. One of the contractors hesitated. "We've been working around it." Melissa looked back toward the stone columns. "No," she replied. "Shifted over a few feet. The entrance needs to line up." The contractor didn't move. "I don't think we're supposed to touch survey markers." Melissa sighed. "It's just an old boundary stone. We're not changing property lines. We're cleaning up the entrance." The crew exchanged uncertain looks. Finally, one of the laborers asked the question everyone else was thinking. "Shouldn't we verify it first?" Melissa folded her arms. "I've already approved the design." Then she pointed directly at the monument. "Move it." Standing a short distance away, I realized the people holding the equipment weren't the ones making the mistake. They were simply following instructions. And the person giving those instructions had absolutely no idea what she was ordering them to move. The crew finished relocating the monument before the end of the afternoon. It only moved about 3 feet. They filled the old hole, packed fresh gravel around the base, and smoothed the ground until it looked like nothing had ever been there. Melissa admired the entrance from the road. "Much better," she said. The stone columns lined up perfectly. The landscaping looked balanced. Everyone packed up and went home believing they'd solved a cosmetic problem. I drove back to my ranch, hoping they had somehow gotten lucky. Maybe the monument wasn't officially referenced anymore. Maybe there was a newer control point I didn't know about. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I stopped by the county records office. I wasn't there to file a complaint. I simply wanted to confirm whether that monument still appeared in the official survey network. The technician pulled up the digital control map. One look at the screen told us everything. The monument wasn't obsolete. It remained an active control point referenced by multiple recorded plats, engineering surveys, and boundary certifications dating back decades. The technician looked from the map to me. "Please tell me it's still where it's supposed to be." I didn't answer immediately. Finally, I said, "Not anymore." His expression changed instantly. He printed the control records without another word. As I gathered the paperwork, he reached for his phone. "I need to notify the survey supervisor." I left the office before the conversation went any further. Meanwhile, construction at Cedar Ridge continued like nothing had happened. Concrete crews poured foundations. Electricians installed utility lines. The entrance landscaping was nearly complete. Melissa even stopped by the site again later that week. She smiled as she looked at the finished entrance. "See," she told the contractor, "nobody even noticed." She couldn't have been more wrong. By Friday afternoon, the county survey supervisor had already opened an official review, not because someone filed a complaint, because an active survey control monument had suddenly stopped matching the county's own records, and once that discrepancy appeared inside the surveying system, the county was legally obligated to find out why. For the first couple of weeks, nothing seemed to happen. Construction continued. New driveways were poured. Framing crews moved from one lot to the next. The entrance walls were nearly finished, and fresh landscaping covered the ground where the monument had originally stood. Every time I drove past, Melissa looked more confident. She greeted contractors like the project was right on schedule. Part of me started wondering if I'd overestimated the situation. Maybe the county had found another reference point. Maybe relocating the monument wasn't going to affect anything after all. Then one Monday morning, I noticed 2 White County trucks parked beside the entrance. Several licensed surveyors were standing near the landscaping. Bright orange witness markers had appeared across the property. The construction crews weren't working. They were watching. I pulled over across the road. One surveyor carefully uncovered the area where the original monument had once been, while another compared measurements against historical records and satellite coordinates. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody accused anyone of wrongdoing. They simply documented everything. Melissa arrived about 20 minutes later. She walked over with the same confidence she'd carried for weeks. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked. The survey supervisor looked up from his notes. "We're verifying the location of a recorded survey control monument." Melissa smiled politely. "That was relocated during landscaping." The supervisor stopped writing. "You relocated it?" "It was only a few feet," she answered. "The contractor handled it." For the first time, I saw uncertainty replace confidence on her face. The supervisor closed his notebook. "I'll need the names of everyone who authorized that decision." The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. By the time Melissa walked back toward her SUV, she wasn't looking at the entrance anymore. She was looking at the ground where that monument had originally stood, and I had a feeling this was no longer just another routine county review. The county's review stretched into another week. Construction didn't stop, not yet. Crews kept showing up every morning. Concrete was poured. Roof trusses went up. From the outside, Cedar Ridge looked like any other busy subdivision. Melissa acted the same way. Whenever she visited the site, she carried her clipboard, spoke confidently with contractors, and assured homeowners that the county was just verifying paperwork. "It's routine," I overheard her tell one family. "They'll be finished in a day or 2. But little things started changing. County vehicles appeared more often. Survey crews returned with additional equipment. Engineers spent longer walking the property than actually measuring it. Boxes of archived plats and construction records were carried into the temporary site office. Each visit lasted a little longer than the one before. The contractors noticed. Conversations became quieter. People who had once laughed through lunch breaks now stood together, watching the county teams work. Even Melissa stopped smiling as much. One afternoon, I saw her pull aside the lead engineer. She spoke in a calm voice, but I could tell from his expression he didn't have the answer she wanted. She nodded, thanked him, and walked away, pretending everything was under control. 2 days later, the county requested every survey, engineering certification, and construction approval connected to the subdivision entrance. The developer's project manager arrived that afternoon carrying several large storage boxes filled with documents. Nobody called it an investigation, but everyone had stopped calling it routine. Then came the meeting that changed everything. The county survey supervisor, the developer, the project engineer, and Melissa all disappeared into the temporary office for nearly 2 hours. When they finally came out, the developer wasn't walking beside Melissa anymore. He was several steps ahead of her, talking quietly with his attorney. Melissa stood alone in the parking area for a moment, staring at the entrance she had worked so hard to perfect. For the first time since this started, she looked uncertain. The next morning, bright orange notices appeared across the active construction zones. Stop work order. Within an hour, every machine had shut down. Concrete deliveries were canceled. Inspectors suspended all remaining permit approvals tied to the expansion. Before lunch, the developer informed homeowners that future construction schedules were being postponed until further notice. That afternoon, emergency meetings replaced construction meetings. Invoices stopped moving. Contractor payments were placed on hold. The developer's attorney began interviewing everyone who had been involved in the entrance project. Melissa sat through the emergency HOA board meeting without saying much. When another board member asked whether this was still just a paperwork issue, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she quietly looked toward the subdivision entrance. Then, almost to herself, she said, "I didn't think moving it would matter." No one in the room responded, because by then, everyone understood. The problem wasn't the 3 feet. It was everything that decision had set in motion. The county's formal review reached its final stage the following week. Representatives from the developer, the engineering firm, the HOA, and the county survey office gathered inside a conference room overlooking the subdivision. I wasn't there as a witness. I was there because my property shared the original boundary referenced by the monument. The survey supervisor began with aerial photographs. Then came historical plats. One by one, he placed transparent survey overlays across the maps until decades of property records lined up with perfect precision. Finally, he pointed to the original monument location. "This," he said, "is the legal control point every one of these surveys references." The room fell quiet. No one argued. No one interrupted. The supervisor let the silence settle before opening the next file. Inside were engineering certifications, recorded plats, and construction approvals, all tied back to that same monument. He looked around the room. When this monument was moved, he said calmly, every certification that depended on its recorded position became subject to verification. Across the table, the project engineer slowly removed his glasses. No one spoke. For the first time, everyone seemed to grasp that this wasn't about a landscaping decision. It was about the legal foundation of the entire project. The county then displayed photographs taken before and after the monument had been relocated. The difference measured only a few feet. The consequences reached far beyond that. Next came the authorization records, emails, construction logs, meeting minutes. One email from weeks before construction caught everyone's attention. A contractor had written, "The survey marker may interfere with the entrance design. Please advise before we proceed." The response arrived later that afternoon. "Adjust as needed to maintain the approved layout." Melissa lowered her eyes. The survey supervisor opened one final document, minutes from an HOA planning meeting. There, in plain text, was the discussion about the entrance redesign. One sentence stood out. "It's just an old rock. Move it if it improves the entrance." No one needed to ask who had said it. The room remained completely still. After a long pause, the county survey supervisor closed the file. "I believe we've established what happened." He wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. The documents had already spoken. The county concluded that an active survey control monument had been intentionally relocated without legal authorization, requiring the subdivision's boundary certifications and related approvals to be independently re-verified before construction could continue. The developer leaned back in his chair and covered his face with one hand. His attorney quietly gathered the files. Melissa never looked up. When the meeting ended, she waited until everyone else had left before walking outside. I was standing near my truck when she approached. "You knew," she said quietly. "I knew what it was," I answered. "Why didn't you stop us?" "I tried." She didn't argue. She looked back toward the subdivision entrance for a long moment. "It was only 3 feet." I nodded. "It always was." She gave a faint, defeated smile. "I guess it was never really about the distance." "No," I said. "It was about moving the one thing every other measurement depended on." She stood there for another moment before turning toward her car. Neither of us said another word. There wasn't anything left to explain. The county officially closed its investigation about 6 weeks later. By then, Cedar Ridge looked like a completely different neighborhood. Not because the houses had changed, because the confidence had. The grand entrance that had been featured on every brochure now sat behind temporary fencing, while licensed surveyors installed permanent control markers under county supervision. The same homeowners who had proudly taken family photos there now walked past it without saying much at all. The developer absorbed the cost of corrected surveys, revised engineering certifications, updated plats, delayed inspections, and months of construction setbacks. Every remaining phase of the subdivision had to be independently verified before the county would approve another permit. The HOA wasn't found to own the legal problem, but it had unquestionably created it. At the next special board meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Homeowners filled every chair, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. Melissa stood at the front one last time. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't argue with anyone. She simply announced that she was resigning as HOA president for personal reasons. Nobody interrupted. Nobody applauded. The room stayed almost completely silent. Once Melissa stepped down, the remaining board members voted on their very first policy change. From that day forward, no HOA improvement project, no matter how small, could begin without an independent boundary verification performed by a licensed surveyor before construction was approved. About a month later, one of the new board members stopped by my ranch. He wasn't there to argue. He wasn't there to negotiate. He simply wanted to apologize. We confused confidence with authority, he admitted. We got so used to making decisions that nobody stopped to ask whether we actually had the legal right to make them. I looked across the pasture toward the road. I'm not looking for apologies, I said. I'm looking for people to respect property lines. He nodded. I think we finally understand the difference. Life gradually returned to normal. The horses still wandered the pasture every morning. The fences still needed repairing after every storm, and the original survey monument remained exactly where history had placed it, now protected by a permanent county marker explaining why it mattered. Every time I drove past Cedar Ridge, my eyes still found that stone. Most people admired the entrance. I noticed the monument, because while people argued over authority and appearances, that old stone quietly stayed where it belonged, and in the end, it outlasted every meeting, every assumption, and every person who believed they could move history simply because it was inconvenient. The funny thing is, people still ask me whether I regret staying quiet that morning Melissa ordered the monument moved. My answer always catches them off guard. People still assume I had some elaborate plan from the beginning. I didn't. I never tried to embarrass Melissa. I never called the county asking them to investigate. I never contacted the news. And I never set out to stop Cedar Ridge's development. I simply understood something most people never think about. Some things exist for a reason, even if they don't look important anymore. A survey monument isn't impressive. Most people drive past one without ever realizing it's there. But those quiet little markers carry legal history that can't simply be moved because they're inconvenient. Melissa believed shifting one forgotten stone would improve the neighborhood entrance. Instead, it delayed an entire development, triggered months of reviews, and permanently changed how that community handled every future project. The biggest mistakes aren't always made by people trying to break the rules. Sometimes they're made by people who convince themselves the rules don't apply to them. So let me ask you, if you had been standing where I was, knowing exactly what would happen, would you have warned the HOA one last time? Or would you have stepped back and let the consequences of their own decision unfold? Let me know what you would have done in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where arrogance meets reality, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.